I'm adding a footnote to this show. Listen for the EVP, 1701. I only found it after I listened to the recording. Interesting. Hello, I'm Wendy. Thanks for tuning in. I experience things that most people don't talk about. And for a while, I didn't like talking about it because it made me feel self conscious. It didn't make the experiences go away. So, what I have done is to continue to talk about it and to also interview other people about things like ETs, ghosts, the elementals, Sasquatch, all of these kinds of things that may not be popular because of the consensus view that they don't exist and that people who see these things, experience these things, must be taking some very fancy liquid, to put it mildly. But we experience these things regardless. And I'm not the only one. So I continue to talk about it. On my nightstand at the moment, beyond coincidence, Alex Tannis with Harvey Ardman. Also, another Alex Tannis reference, dream symbols and psychic power, because it's relevant and because he is an experiencer and he wrote about it. So, again, we're going to go with some personal experience to share why I think this is valid and relevant and important to compare notes. Referencing my previous interviews with J.M. DeBoard when we talked about his book, Nightmares. And during the conversation, we talked about Alex Tannis. Alex Tannis, if you want to find a book, Beyond Coincidence, One Man's Experiences with Psychic Phenomena, he wrote a lot about his experience, his viewpoint of the world. And you can find out more. There's an extensive library the Alex Tannis Foundation has compiled with his work, how he was tested, was prolifically psychic, and also could demonstrate his abilities in lab experiments. That's one of the things that's very, very difficult to do, is reproduce the paranormal stuff in a psychic experiment. That's worth talking about. Alex underwent a lot of testing. This is one that describes the kinetic effects at the ostensible location of an out-of-body projection during perceptual testing. The experiment tested the kinetic effects of an astral body, psychic or spiritual. Alex was placed in an isolated room at the ASPR. He was then asked to leave his body, enter a separate sealed chamber to identify visual targets. Strain gauge sensors placed in front of the viewing window of the optical image device registered any mechanical effect in the area of the targets. In 197 trials extending over 20 sessions, the data showed that the strain gauge sensors were significantly more active when hits, or correct identifications, were recorded than when there were misses. Something or someone could be said to have been present when the subject, Alex, was presumably looking at the targets. The results were introduced as confirming to a hypothesis that during the experiment the subject was out of his body and somehow in the sealed chamber viewing the targets, that he was successful during that experiment. Part of his research in reading through his work, he didn't experience, even when dealing with sites that were haunted, going on site and being scratched or in some way influenced in a negative way by the entities that were there. So this show is called Acknowledging the Entities, because he does acknowledge them. He just didn't have the negative experiences that some people do feel when they are in an environment considered to be extremely haunted. Whether you're talking about elementals, Sasquatch, ETs, all of that stuff, it's difficult to label it because there are so many factors that we have yet to identify. There's very little coverage of that in a positive way. You might have a course on psychic protection or even in psychic development, understanding that there are boundaries needed, but why? Because these things exist and they have existed, and we've dealt with them through centuries. There are written accounts saying that people have had this kind of interaction. So, from going to ETs, which is really difficult to focus on that, or ghosts, and it's difficult to focus on that, or the undead, people who are still here, they just don't have a body, I started working with Nightlights. The Nightlights in 1997, so it's been 25 years, and this Nightlight thing is still ongoing. But then it helped me to develop a better awareness and a dialogue with my own guides and with that other element of non-corporeal that may or may not have been incarnate in a physical form. but still has the ability to influence us and influence us even if we aren't channeling, even if we aren't acknowledging that this thing is a presence in our life. When you hear voices, yes, I've heard voices, and I do hear voices on occasion, then there's an acknowledgement and an indication that you're not alone. I know I'm not alone. I haven't been since I was a kid. I know that. And there was some point when I felt paranoid because I knew I wasn't alone. And so, what are they doing here? Why? How come this is happening? And who do you talk to? Because other people, mainstream or certain kinds of religious elements, insist that this isn't happening. And if it is, it's very negative and bad, and ignore it and it'll go away, or get help and make it go away. And it isn't always about getting help and making it go away, because sometimes it's about acknowledging there's something there and maybe I can help. Maybe that's the whole point of the contact, is that we are being asked to lend a hand, assist. It happened with someone who was a suicide in a building that we purchased. And this is in the mid 90s, where this being is actually coming into my body, trying to influence me a certain way. It took a while for me to understand that this was even possible, because I thought that was more of a fiction thing, and these were just TV shows and made up, or if it was a religious thing that needed to be accounted for in some kind of, frame of a religious element. And I didn't buy into any of that. And it kept happening. At one point, a shelf in the room fell on my head. It fell off the wall and hit me on the head. 3 bookshelves full. And what happened during that was there was also a pickle jar, an antique pickle jar that belonged to my husband, that fell in the middle of all that, and it wasn't broken. So it managed to do no damage and give me a bump on the head that said, "Wake up." That was when I became aware of this other being, the guy who was a suicide, who was still in the apartment and doing things, paranormal things. We had an entertainment center that had magnetic glass shelves that you open and shut, and the little magnet pulls it back. I came home and they were wide open. Someone had opened them. They were equidistant apart. So it was like it was intentional. And so I called my husband and said, "Did you come home?" It was impossible, but just in case, I was covering all the bases. "No, of course not." "Then how did this happen?" "We went on vacation. My cat, who was all white, mostly white, Huey, he parked himself, even though somebody came over to check on him. He parked himself mid-level between the upstairs and downstairs in the corner, because that's where all the hair was. And he didn't move from that spot. So he was afraid to move in that apartment because of something. When I figured out what happened by asking other people who were in the neighborhood, they all knew about the suicide. And the people who sold the place to us, it was a duplex, gave us a really good price. And we didn't know why. And we didn't know the background. We just know, okay, this is a good opportunity. We're going to live here. It'll be great. It was after we got the other thing dealt with. Okay, so when I realized that this was someone trying to speak to me, and here's what goes next. I wake up. I realized in the middle of the night that I was having difficulty breathing. I would wake up choking. And here's how the logic works. Well, at least for me. Oh, I just saw through the window a hawk fly out of the tree. That was interesting timing. What happened was I would wake up choking and thought I didn't know somehow how to breathe when I was asleep, that I was forgetting something like that. How that was possible, don't ask me. But at the time, I was trying to make this make sense because it wasn't supposed to be happening. And I put a pillow under my head so I would sleep elevated, extra elevated, so that I wouldn't choke. The morning I woke up and felt through my body an influence that I was acting not of my own volition, just going, "Oh, oh." And I realized, this isn't me. That isn't me. Something is making me speak. And it's a ghost. It sounds like that's what a ghost would sound like. So here I am trying to figure this out and realizing, okay, why would there be a ghost? Beyond how the heck could it be acting through me? It wasn't negative. It wasn't trying to possess me. It wasn't trying to do anything naughty. It was trying to get my attention because of what I was doing at the time, reading tarot, and I've been intuitive, and those things were part of my life. It thought I could see it and I should know how to fix the situation it stuck itself in. And I'm only speaking to this one particular instance of suicide. He was upset. And he was also angry at me because I was so dense I couldn't see the obvious, that he was still there, stuck, and trying every way he knew how to get me to help him. So when I found out by talking to the neighbors, yes, there had been a suicide in this building, and the guy was incredibly meticulous, very, well, how do I say, obsessive compulsive. Because in the closet, everything had been about an inch apart and spaced very neat, very tidy, very incredibly efficient and perfectionistic. Well, so when he ended up being a suicide, all of a sudden those things didn't work anymore. And of course, that isn't my housekeeping method. So that was equally annoying in his space to see things in disarray. Okay, and plus we had a pet. So that also adds a little extra overage. I realized I needed to help him, and he thought I knew how. So eventually, I figured out how to ask his people and him to cooperate, and because he didn't seem to have any connections that he valued. At the same time, his connections valued him. So I asked for them to come help him and the angels to assist making that connection. And it worked. But he was still angry because as he left, he continued to call me names and talk about what a, failure I was. I'm sure everybody in his life had to have heard all that. But not only that, he told it to himself. So all this anger then left, and the three entities who came to pick him up and take him to the light, to where he needed to go, thanked me. So I got thank you from them as he went kicking and screaming and howling and yowling and cursing out the door to the light. Okay, so that was my first experience with clearing an entity from a space, my space, and actually having the entity take over my body, my form, which of course that does not happen. That's impossible. No, right. So all the things that I had been taught were impossible and didn't exist shifted with that experience. And I began to see other people having these experiences and seeing the reaction when they tried to share them and get help or support to acknowledge that this could indeed be possible, seeing them shunned and devalued and discouraged and shamed. So when we do that to other people because we haven't had the experience and we don't believe it, we dismiss a greater reality that has been here all along. You don't have to believe it for it to happen. If it happens, then you know something is going on that you don't have a frame of reference for, and that you may or may not be able to deny from that point on. Denial, yeah, okay. It doesn't fix things. All it does is delay and then sometimes prohibit healing and forward momentum and growth. So I was forced to grow beyond what I knew because I experienced something that changed my frame of reference for reality. We were mentioning Alex Tannis, and I'll go back to the book Beyond Coincidence, One Man's Experiences with Psychic Phenomena. All right, it's out there. Or go to the Alex Tannis Foundation, and that's Alex Tannis, TANOUS, 1N.org, and read some of his information, some of the things that he studied and why I have such respect for his work. I respect Ingo Swann's work. There are some other mediums, psychics that I do respect. But with this, he's laid out a frame of reference. Ingo Swann has a great site too, ingoswann, 2ns.com.org. I can't remember it. I'm not going to look it up right now. Anyway, you can do the math. That's why you're here. So those kinds of things are happening. Right now, with all the UFO stuff, people are talking more freely about having ET experiences. I've had that. Not necessarily the UFO landing on the front yard. It came in my bedroom. And as far as I consider, it was spying on me. That's an accusation, okay. Maybe it was just overseeing and helping or something. But it was curious, and when I found out or noticed that it was there, because the dog barked, the dog growled, I thought that it was growling at a cat. Nope. Nope. It was this thing that was near the ceiling, hovering, and about the size of a dinner plate, maybe 13 inches or so in diameter, with lights. And I believe at the time I thought 15 to 17 lights, red and green. And these are clear bulbs, really about maybe 3 inches in diameter, 2.5, 3 inches in diameter. And they, it was like, I call it a Christmas tree UFO because it was red and green. It shifted in the moment when I started to try and focus, because I'm thinking there's no way it will let me take its picture. There is no way I can figure out what this is. I need to imprint it, somehow get it to stick. And the minute I started focusing like that, it disappeared or shifted. It was outside, and I could see it, the lights through the mini blinds. It was immediately outside the window. At that point, I knew it was a futile effort to try and figure out anything more, so I went back to sleep. Okay, now, so that is not absolutely normal, or is it? A lot of people who have had UFO ET unexplained experiences like that also talk about immediately falling asleep, immediately saying, no big deal, fall asleep. I remember consciously thinking, I can't go any further with this. It doesn't want to be seen. So I am intelligent enough in that moment, I have my wits about me, to think logically, there's no way I can follow up with this, so I will go back to sleep. Other people who said they went back to sleep sometimes say they don't understand why. That it was really amazing, extraordinary, unusual, and they were curious about it, but they went to sleep. So going to sleep after some kind of a phenomena like this is not uncommon. I think sometimes we're overwhelmed by it. For one thing, I don't know where it came from, the origination. Should I call it an ET? It was a drone-like thing because it was small and went through the wall, and there's no other way to describe it. It didn't make any sound. The only reason I knew it was there was because the dog said, "Hey, dude, wake up." I assumed the cat was, the focus. No. So I am fortunate to have my pets who indicate when things are going, um, when there's other activity around, whether it's something I can see or not. They are aware and have given me a clue. The most fantastic time was when one of my dogs indicated that there were things in the room that shouldn't be there. And I cleared the space, one room by one room, as the dog sat in the door frame, and waited for me to take out the objects that did not belong. And during that time, I was able to ask my dog, "Is this okay?" She would blink once, and I can't remember if it was for yes or no, but she would blink once for yes and two for no. That never happened after that time. Something else was happening in my own evaluation. I interpret it to have been an intervention that was happening with the assistance of my dog. It was extraordinary. I cleared the objects again that did not belong in each of those rooms, and I was only able to do it with her assistance. She alerted me. She sat there until the objects were removed. I'm not going to go into detail on some of these things because they're personal and because the only way I can really give you an idea of what happened is to relate it on a larger scale and make it more of an overview so that if these things happen for you, then you can attach it to an incident and not necessarily a person. Okay? Because I find more relevance and more importance that an entity intervened and helped me with the assistance of an animal. And sometimes we overlook the value of our pets and other animals in our space to act as intermediaries and to assist us with the help of other entities. Well, the other thing about that other entity element is it acts through people too. So sometimes a person will help you and have no memory of the event and of your involvement. They just did it. And the person may or may not exist, at least in our way of thinking. I have had experiences where certain people showed up. One had on the vehicle judge, and that was a challenging time for me when I was experiencing things across the board paranormal, eliminating an entity from my space with the help of my husband. An entity that I had sensed before was acting through another person and empowered when that other person was present and staying behind, occupying the space, my space, as a deterrent for me in terms of having other contacts with healthier people who didn't have those kinds of attachments and parking in that space until this other person showed up to help me release the spirit. Having this experience with another person is absolutely a lifesaver because you have a witness, someone who is also seeing what you're seeing and experiencing the same event. A quick break. Having the experience and encountering that entity was a wake up call. And we had to do a lot of things, which I'm not going to go into to get it out. And when we did, this was like, huh, oh, it was like a movie, with these films you see with the ghosts and all that good stuff holding the space and not wanting to leave. We opened the door, cleared the space, the typical kind of smudging and praying and that cleared the space with the help of this other, I'm female, the male entity was incredibly overpowering for me. Even though I knew it was there, I wasn't able to get rid of it because it had the assistance of the person that it occupied. So there's two types of energy grounding this entity in my space. So when my friend shows up, somebody I had known for a long time, previous, childhood contact and connection and previous lifetimes, showed up, then that energy gave me the boost I needed to help identify and solidify this element in a way that it could be eliminated, eradicated from my space. And when we opened the door, it held that door shut. This is a glass screened outer door, exterior door. And we're trying to open that door, and you can't see anything. You can just feel the weight of this force keeping the door shut. So, with my energy and my husband combined, we were able to get this element, open up the door, and get the element out of my space, and it stayed out. But it also belonged and accompanied another person, and that's what gave it power. So, these entities that are around us, it doesn't matter how well we live our lives, how well-meaning, well-intentioned we are. These entities are attracted to certain people, certain timelines, certain belief systems, and certain actions. So you are always projecting a type of frequency, broadcast, vibration that can attract other entities, elements to your space, to your being. This gets into free will. When people say, I am free, I don't have to do this, I am liberated, that doesn't account for the belief system that helps them to facilitate, create, maintain that freedom to choose. So even if you're convinced, coerced, dragged to a certain meeting and say, well, they made me do it. Well, then there's a mentality that goes into that said, I'm a victim. It's the same time agreeing to go along with the group is not a victim. Agreeing, allowing, going along, that's a choice. You can also say, no, I don't choose to do that at this time, and nobody will convince me to come here. Free will is saying, I am here. I own my actions. I believe in what I am doing. I am accountable. And that is what happens when somebody shows up at a therapist and says, I think I need help. Not because somebody else said, you better go get help. And I've experienced this before when somebody said, well, so and so said we had no business doing this. We had no business doing this, you and I. It didn't come from the person who said that. It came from that person's posse. And knowing that, I needed that person to actually participate without the posse. And when you hear this in your own life, you can make decisions based on your own awareness of what happens when people agree to go along with a group and they maintain that group focus rather than their personal focus. Because even allowing the group to make the decisions says you still are putting your free will, investing your free will into group thought. I wanted to talk about this time because there are so many opportunities now to give away power and to allow somebody else to make decisions because it's the popular group, the powerful group, the attractive group. These groups are swaying people away from using their own discernment for whatever reason. Not bad, not good. The deal is to be conscious of these attractive factors, to understand where we are investing our power, our thoughts, our imagination, our focus. When it comes down to it, each and every decision we make, personal decision, creates a vibration, frequency, something for others to react, respond, acknowledge. So that way, you and I are empowered to flow. Sometimes, when it looks like you are not responding, the response you are invested in is called patience. Stepping back, determining the next reaction, choosing to avoid a reflex, autopilot, automatic response due to conditioning. You are conditioned. I am conditioned to respond in a certain way because that's the way it's done. That is what is expected. That is what is being anticipated from the collective. When we deviate, we change frequency. We change the vibration. We shift formula. We allow deviation. Something else is going to happen because we have changed from becoming autopilot respondents, not thinking for ourselves, allowing the collective to put forth whatever is being broadcast, programmed, projected, and giving away our power. But when we wait, take a moment to actually decide how we are going to invest our response energy, we change everything. The first thing I got when I started doing public exhibitions of the guidance, the channeling, how it came through, my interaction with the energy of the nightlight, the energy that manipulates, manifests, and activates the nightlight. First thing I got was a demonstration of how to get out of autopilot. An autopilot is when you go along lockstep with everybody else because it's the thing to do and because there's less pushback. Okay. Um, Less trauma, repercussions. People don't bother you as much. But when you upset the apple cart and say, I'm not going to do this the way that you're doing it, it doesn't work for me. The autopilot response to that is to convince you or try to convince you or in some way say, you're doing it wrong. You're not doing what we're doing, so you are doing it wrong. You are not reflecting our actions as positive. You're wrong. You're a problem. You're an outcast. You're embarrassing us. Don't do that. It's not a good look on us. Okay, so you take it back and say, I'm going to continue doing this because I need to continue doing this. I need to see where it's going for me. I'm not devaluing you. I agree that what you're doing works for you. or it may work for you the way you want it to. It doesn't work for me. I need to do my way different. As long there's another caveat to this, and it's no harm. All right. As long as you're doing no harm in seeking out what works for you, to yourself or others. That is the one main and really, really, really big clue to working this effectively, efficiently, where you don't have karma. Okay. It's okay to be stupid and do dumb things and have to, account for that. Like, oh, shoot. But when you go back and do it intentionally, knowing it's wrong, there's the karma. Okay. We can make mistakes. We can make mistakes as long as the day is. We can make mistakes. But when we do something intentionally with the intent to harm another being, non being, entity, element, space, that's where we have issues. And those issues come back to haunt. So with that one little caveat, following your own sense, your own being, your own purpose, your own guide, your own thread, that's where we grow because it forces change, deviation from consensus, deviation from autopilot programming. And that's where there's freedom. Now, backing away from that and going into the presence of others, of entities, of beings, non-beings, form and non-form, thought forms, they're here. And we create some of them. Some of them were created long before we showed up, and they'll be here long after we're gone in the physical form. But to help deal with that, the first thing is to acknowledge the possibility that there are some things here we cannot account for and we cannot explain. And we might not be able to eliminate because they don't exist on our dimension, on our level of being. They aren't physical. So to deal with a non-physical element, you have to become adept at working your non-physical element, your non-physical form, that OBE state. And that's a whole different level of being. Acknowledging it exists is the first step. Then, when things happen, and I'll give you two stories very quickly. One, a woman who was a romance novel writer, and she became incredibly successful because of one book that actually, when I had my conversation with her, Gail Rogers, she talked about this having been a past life experience that she just put it in writing and words, and then it became a bestseller. She had an experience where she was driving down the road, and this was for her very highly emotional, traumatic experience. And all of a sudden, in the car, she had her hands on the wheels, and she had somebody take her hands. She could feel this form take her hands and put them on the wheel, and it helped her. That action was helpful in that time. The other experience, and this happens for another, from a male vantage point, from a completely, totally opposite frame of reference. He's driving down the road, and this is a place where it's like a 300-foot drop. As he rounds this corner, or is going to round the corner, there's a 300-foot drop off this road. And he feels he's in a good mood. He said there was nothing, it was all fine, peachy, going on the way to somewhere. He was looking forward to it, very relaxed. Okay, cue. Very relaxed. All of a sudden, he felt something grab his arms as he's gripping the wheel. And very quickly, powerfully, quickly, turn his wheel to the left, which would take him over that 300-foot drop. He immediately said no, turned the wheel back, and said he felt it go. The tire was actually off the pavement on the gravel, but the car didn't fishtail, and he continued on. He said this is a stretch of road that he'd traveled before and since never experiencing that again. The point is, these entities exist. When we are focused and fully present in our being, they are unable to redirect us. They are unable to interfere in a way that causes long-term fallout. But failing to acknowledge these entities is a disservice to us, to our society, to our collective consciousness because it does not give us permission to raise our level of awareness where we can be competent on that higher dimensional plane. The guides, the teachers, the non-corporeals suggest telepathy is where we need to improve our awareness, our abilities, and focus less on the daily drama, trauma, autopilot, routine, and become more spiritually aware, adept. And so that is where my focus has been, having the ability to at least acknowledge it and share the awareness. And some days I will have guests who are going to mirror that and help me deliver that message. The message is there are entities among us. I don't give them a good or bad because they vary. What we call them is where we focus our ability. Because when you put a label on something, the label manifests. That's how good we are. We are very good at recreating and creating reality. When we know that, we start being focused on requiring things to be less labeled. Because sometimes that label gives permission to go that direction. Whereas if you keep it in a neutral state, you have a lot more ability to shift it to a higher plane, a higher way of being, and allow those who reflect that to show up and reflect your path forward. All right, I'm going to stop for now because basically I'm keeping this to a certain time. But I also want to say, if you are more interested in that kind of focus, there are lots of teachers, lots of people who are on this path and who have dealt with adversaries and have dealt with angels and have dealt with others that are not in our frame of reference. We don't know how to classify them because technically they don't exist in consensus reality. But they're just now starting to make more appearances to give us permission to say they exist without being laughed at. It doesn't matter. If you have an experience, you are the one who knows how to articulate it. You may not know how to explain it, but at least acknowledging it is a step forward. So acknowledge, if you will, there is a possibility that we have yet to label everything in our reality, to identify it, to incorporate it, to address it. As we do that, we expand our knowing, our awareness, our potential. And that's the way forward. My blog is Talking to Nightlights on WordPress. Talking to Nightlights, I slurred it. Talking to Nightlights on WordPress. It's because I know where it is. And then the podcast with the guest interviews. I think there are 300 or so that I've kept available anywhere you listen to podcasts. You'll draw the entities you need. You already have some. They're guides, higher guides. You can listen to them. You can ignore them. You can allow them to be present. And if you ask for a higher guide to show up, be ready once you have asked. And in that way, you open the door, and then you can choose to ignore it or go forward. It's free will. That you have. And upcoming, it may not be in linear form, but it'll be on the platform in the program. One of my guests, we're going to deal a couple of shows with shamanism and psychic self-defense. I hope you'll join me. Stay curious. There's a whole lot more to this reality. It's what makes life so interesting and fascinating and extraordinary to be here at this time, to be able to identify and incorporate these elements on a conscious level. Take care.